Hey guys, earlier this morning I put together a little video regarding primates and great apes, and in doing so I touched on human origins just a little bit. Well, today we'll go ahead and finish it up. This is Human Origins Part 2, aka the story of you and me. So before I go on to the next slide, I'll point out that picture there. I believe that is Homo erectus, a different species of hominid. So the skull kind of looks like a Homo sapiens skull, right? But you'll notice that the ridge above the eye line is a little more protruded. So you'll start noticing differences like that with some of these other fossils. There's more of a ridge. Their cranial capacity is a little bit different in some cases. So yeah, these are different animals. Okay, but here we go. As you all know, I have a weird obsession with David Attenborough and many of his documentaries, okay? So next week when I get back, we're going to watch an episode from his Our Planet series. This episode's called Jungles. And in this episode, you will see quite a few different species of primate. And one of the things I said in the last presentation I made is that we'll start talking a little bit about some of the conservation issues regarding the other great apes. Like, why are they at risk? And you'll see this in his Jungles episode. You'll see this pertaining to orangutans specifically. So why are these animals at risk? And we'll talk about things like palm oil plantations and how that leads to habitat loss. But again, I'm just kind of mentioning that briefly now. We'll come back and discuss that in more detail down the road, okay? And on the right there, next to David Attenborough, you see another one of my heroes. That's Jane Goodall. So here you have two of the great British naturalists. Jane Goodall, if you recall, she is the one who spent most of her adult life in the African bush studying chimps, our closest relative. Okay, so let's move on. The oldest humans. So in the last presentation, I made a comment that chimps and hominids kind of diverged from a theoretical common ancestor somewhere around 4 to 6 million years ago. So on the left, you see a dude named Ardipithecus, right? If he's not the oldest human, so it kind of gets debated, what do you call a hominid or not, okay? So perhaps Ardipithecus is the oldest, again, going by how you debate, right? And then on the right, you see Australopithecus, aka Lucy. Lucy, guys, oh my goodness, Lucy is a big story here. Okay, so going back in the 60s, you had this anthropologist. His name was Louis Leakey. Big name, important guy, Louis Leakey. And this guy had a team, and they were digging up fossils and whatnot in Africa, Eastern Africa. And they come across this fossil, right? And they're all like, hey, what do we name this? Because it looks human, but it's not quite like Homo sapiens human. They were confused, right? Like, well, what is it? So they were kind of debating back and forth. What is it? What should they call it? And so forth. And, you got to imagine, this is in the 60s, right? So, they have the radio playing in the background, and there's a song by the Beatles. And some of you know this song. It's called Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds. It's actually about LSD, but that's a different topic altogether, I guess. But anyways, Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds came on the radio. So this group of anthropologists are going back and forth, like, what do we name this fossil? What is it? And then somebody said, let's just name it Lucy. So the name stuck. Australopithecus is also known as Lucy. Big fossil, big discovery. It really opened the door for us to understand the origins of humans and origins other than our genus Homo. That's very interesting, right? As it turns out, Ardipithecus is an older fossil, okay? It just so happens that Ardi was discovered after Lucy. So Lucy was a bigger deal historically from that standpoint, okay? In the picture there, you see footsteps. Okay, so there are footsteps that are of Lucy's, or that species anyways, that are fossilized. And It's amazing, guys. It's absolutely amazing. We'll see the footsteps of like uh, man and wife. I'm using modern human terms, forgive me. Husband and wife walking back and forth with a little set of footprints scattered amongst them, like if it was their child. So it's very, very human, right? But at the same time, the footsteps don't match our feet. Their big toe is bigger, so there are some anatomical and structural differences. Okay, so one other thing before I move on, because that slide has a lot of information there, but one last thing. Louis Leakey, who spent many years digging up fossils in hominid fossils and so forth, toward the end of his career, he had this really interesting idea, and it's amazing. Because Louis Leakey is a big guy, this is a big name. So he had this interesting idea. He said to himself, I spent my career discovering and investigating other species, earlier species of hominids. Well, how about I start studying our relatives, our other great apes, like gorillas and orangutans and chimps. So guess what he started doing? He started sending people out into the bush to study orangutans and gorillas. And he handpicked one young British woman named Jane Goodall. She was at the time unheard of. She was just a little shy little girl. And he says, "Hey Jane, I have picked you." And for whatever reason, he saw something in her and it worked out beautifully. She went off in the bush and spent, like I said in the previous slide, she spent something like 35 years studying and documenting chimps, who are our closest relative. They do a lot of things like us, believe it or not. Okay? And I have a lot of admiration for Louis Leakey and Jane Goodall. If you ever hear Jane Goodall give a speech or give a presentation, she is gentle. She can hit some really important topics without making you feel bad. She has that gift, all right? So one of the things I said in a previous video is that modern man, pardon that pun again, but we happen to be the, quote, last man standing. But yet again, for the millionth time, our closest relative is still the chimp. So I'm going to include this little Jane Goodall YouTube clip. It's kind of touching. I'll put that on Google Classroom for you later on, okay? So now our genus. Here we go. And do we know that they looked this way exactly? We'll never know. These are just some artist interpretations, based on fossils and who knows. So we have Homo habilis, the first known member of our genus, made tools, Homo erectus. You can see the facial differences there in terms of the brow and the ridges and so forth. Homo erectus, also called Peking man and Java man, depending on the different groups that were finding these fossils. This was the first one that migrated out of Africa. Homo floresiensis, aka the Hobbit. That one is really interesting. There's an article there that I'll post again on Google Classroom. The story with Homo floresiensis. This is a fossil that was found on an island, right? So there was island dwarfing going on. If you're familiar with that term, island dwarfing. So it was a little race of Hobbit people. That's why they have the cool nickname, the Hobbit. And this particular species lived as recently as 13,000 years ago. So we coexisted with them for quite some time. Whether or not Homo sapiens, modern man, ever came across them or not, we'll never know. Okay, we'll never know. But nonetheless, that's a really recent species of human, in terms of the timeline there. Okay? And then on the right is one that you've heard of, the Neanderthals. They went extinct around 40,000 years ago. Now, this one gives us some really interesting questions. Like, how did they go extinct? Okay? So I'm gonna rock your world, okay? I'm gonna say this nice and slow. Most of us have Neanderthal DNA. Bam, mic drop. Most of us have Neanderthal DNA. So what exactly does that mean? Did Homo sapiens go in and kill off the Neanderthals throughout Europe and Asia? Did Homo sapiens outcompete them? Which is not the same thing as directly killing them. Did we outcompete them? Were we better at hunting and making fires and shelter and whatnot? and that probably happened. Both of those probably happened to some extent. We'll never know, right? But the fact that most of us anyways, have traces of Neanderthal DNA means that at some point we also just bred with them. So the larger population of Homo sapiens probably took in a very small population of the Neanderthals into our gene pool as we just interbred with them, which again kind of opens up that question that, what is a species, or would this just be like another subspecies or something? How would you define that? It gets very, very complicated, but nonetheless, most of us have traces of Neanderthal DNA. Moving on. This is another one they kind of get lumped in with the Neanderthals, the Denisovans. They were also found throughout Asia and parts of Europe. And like the Neanderthals, went extinct around 40,000 years ago. So here's what we do know. So this is going to kind of rock your world a little bit as well, I think. The earliest Homo sapiens fossils. So I'm not saying hominid fossils. There's a difference there. I'm not talking about Ardipithecus or Australopithecus. We're talking about us, Homo sapiens. The earliest Homo sapiens fossils were found in Eastern Africa. They've been dated to be around 170,000 years old. So y'all should recall, when I say dated, that means radiometrically dating. So this is something that is proven through scientific means, okay? So the oldest modern humans rather, come from Africa. Moreover, by studying the mitochondrial DNA, so yes, your mitochondria also has DNA. By studying mitochondrial DNA, it has been determined conclusively that individuals of African origin have the most mutations, which means that race, that lineage, has been around the longest. So the first modern humans were African. Okay, which really is interesting. It opens the door to so much beautiful discussion regarding the migration of modern man, and I'll get into that in just a couple of slides. Okay, music, art, storytelling, population growth, and culture. This is all strongly intertwined with agriculture. So once we learned how to harvest grains, we could have cities. Instead of having to hunt animals all the time, we could have cities. And instead of, instead of being a hunter, you could have other jobs. You could look at stars, or you could make weapons or whatever, okay? Culture became big because now you could have cave art, and you could draw animals on the wall. You could draw grains. And then music. God almighty, that's the biggest one yet on this bullet. Music. Because when people would crush the grains, they would make beats and start singing along. And you had certain times of the year when you had grains. So now you had festivals and things of that nature. So what I want you to realize, guys, is at this point, we're actually kind of segueing out of biology into anthropology and archaeology and other subjects entirely. Okay, so I mentioned the origin of music. Y'all know I play a djembe. I love that little thing, and I think I'm half decent at it. But again, that is an African instrument. So I'm going to post this video on Google Classroom for you, and it's talking about the origins of music, just like I kind of mentioned briefly a second ago, where folks were hitting grains and they have a beat going, and then next thing you know, there's a piece of leather and they're hitting that. Next thing you know, you have a gourd and you're hitting that, and you're singing along, and you have these beautiful festivals and ceremonies. And that's how the djembe was invented. It's really an ancient instrument in many regards. And you know what? I have another YouTube video with me playing the djembe, talking about it. So I'll post that one up as well, just for shucks and giggles. All right? All right. So here you have man's journey. How can we really figure out this journey with any level of certainty? Well, first off, we have archaeological findings like cave art and pottery and weapons that you can date every step of the way. We also leave our own biological fossils every step of the way. So from 170,000 years ago out of Eastern Africa, you can see arrows, right, where we're getting into Asia, finally around to Europe, and little by little crossing over that Bering Strait. Remember we talked about land bridges, not just the Bering Strait, but also the Isthmus of Panama. And good golly almighty, now we're in South America. This is fascinating stuff. So, cave art. This is a cave in France, Lascaux Cave in France. This was drawn by a group of Homo sapiens. They're called Cro-Magnons. So this is like the early, I guess early Homo sapiens, if you will. Those are the Cro-Magnons. This is really historic. The cave is still there. You can Google it online. It's pretty cool to look at. This is a photograph I took. This is over in West Texas, Seminole Canyon. These pictographs here are done by early Native Americans, and this goes back probably 4,000 or 5,000 years. When I took these photographs, this was the greatest hike of my life, guys. I saw a bear up close. One of the highlights of my life, seeing a bear up close. But, we also saw tons of cool Native American pictographs, which ties in with this lesson, okay? So, like I said, are we still evolving? Biologically, very little. And I hope you understand that we're not evolving that much. There's really very little natural selection that goes on with modern man. And we can debate this, and that's fun, that's healthy. But again, think about it. If you get sick, you go to the doctor, you take an inhaler, you wear glasses, you take medicine, whatever. If you're hungry, you go to HEB, you go to the grocery store, you go to Walmart, McDonald's, whatever. So it's more so that our technology, as we go from the ancient man and pyramids and Stonehenge and to making a craft that can take us to the moon, and I think that's really interesting too, because earlier I had Lucy's footsteps in one of my previous slides. We went from Lucy's footsteps to a man on the moon's footsteps, and who knows where we'll go next. But the question was, are we still evolving, or is it really just our technology? And who knows? These are fun questions to ask and ponder. So, home stretch here. So, microevolution, if you recall, that means the small levels of evolution in modern man. Most of you can digest lactose. You can have milk products. So that comes from the fact that when Genghis Khan was, conquering most of the world, right? He had this ability to digest lactose. Okay, and there's all sorts of really neat history there where his empire, they could digest lactose, right? So they didn't have to bring much food with them when they went and conquered other villages. They could ride horses and just have horse milk. So that kept them, they could bring more weapons and less food, that kind of thing. So it was more efficient, and biologically it helped them out. So as they went around this world fathering people, they were passing along that gene to digest milk. So if you have a gene that enables you to digest milk, somewhere way back, several generations, I guess, you have you could thank Genghis for that. Okay, here's another one. When you get up in the Himalayas and Everest and all that, we talked about that in another lesson, extreme environments, when I talked about Mount Everest a little bit here. Obviously that oxygen is so thin at that altitude, but nonetheless you have the Tibetans with their lung capacity. Every breath they take takes in more oxygen than you and me. So there's an evolutionary feature they have that's unique there. So I want you to think about this though. When we were developing these, we humans, Tibetans specifically, when they were developing that adaptation, that was natural selection. Today, people climb Everest, but they have to bring oxygen tanks and stuff with them. You know what I'm saying? Think about that. Skin tones. So folks that evolved to live in, along the equator have darker skin. So if you have a light-skinned dude like me and I'm living in, Eastern Africa 170,000 years ago, I'm probably going to get skin cancer and die. And there's no natural selection there. I'm not going to pass on genes if I'm getting skin cancer and dying young. Okay, so you look at, as you get to lower light conditions, the skin tones become reduced, but you still have freckles. Okay? This is another one. Oh my gosh, I could go on and on. There's this Native American tribe. They're called the Tarahumarans, and they live up in the mountains of interior Mexico. And these folks run marathons, and they always win. They could actually run like 100 miles at a time, and they don't even get out of breath. But their deal is they have this really, really, really slow metabolism. So if I eat food, I burn it off right away, right? And that goes for all of us. But these guys have this metabolism that's so slow, the food they eat, it lasts them longer, and that enables them to have more energy for long races. So they're always running through the mountains, and they go on and on. It's really, really, really amazing. That book there, Born to Run, it's a beautiful book. It's great. The only drawback with this native tribe is because their metabolism is so slow. If they move out of the tribe and out of the mountains into like Mexico City or whatever, now they're eating more food, so they tend to, because the metabolism is so slow, that puts them at risk for diabetes and things of that nature. Okay, home stretch here, y'all. On the left, you see a photograph there of all sorts of different hominids. There's a YouTube clip I'm going to post on Google Classroom there that speaks about many of the hominids we've talked about today. This YouTube clip is kind of silly, kind of quirky. The music's a little goofy, but I think you'll enjoy it. And then on the right, you see a photograph there of a group of people that live on this island of Sentinel, which is a territory, I guess, of India. And on this island, there's a tribe, guys. It's amazing. They've been there. It's estimated they've been there untouched with no communication or very little communication, like 30,000 years. Simply amazing, right? That's very tribal, but just fascinating at the same time. And here you have a review slide. You can read through that, but I think that last bullet really speaks to the heart of this lesson. Are we still evolving biologically? It started with agriculture, which led to festivals and music and a little bit of culture and giving people other jobs besides just hunting. And then today, perhaps it's continuing on with our technology. And thanks for sticking around with me, guys. I miss you. Hope to see you soon, and God bless.